Porcelain cracked like a gunshot against the kitchen tile. Coffee fanned out, and Madison froze, eyes wide like she'd stumbled onto a stranger in our house. I didn't rush to comfort her. I watched the drip tick off the counter, one beat, two, until the room learned my pace. "What did you say?" she whispered. I closed the book, leveled my voice, and gave her the truth I've been rehearsing for months. "I've been practicing being cold," I said, "because soon I won't need to practice." Silence rearranged the furniture between us. Outside, a lawnmower coughed. Inside, the man she'd been downsizing in public stood up straight. "This isn't a tantrum. It's a line in wet cement. You think you know the story, ambitious wife, comfortable husband, the slow drift. But you missed the folders, the dates, the plan. You missed who learned faster. By Wednesday, a knock will rewrite our vows. Tonight, I'm done auditioning for a role I never wanted." The house breathes like it's afraid to wake me. Sun creeps over the fence and lays a thin gold blade across the kitchen tile right through the coffee stain. The brown halo is drying at the edges, crystallizing into a map that didn't exist an hour ago. I follow its coastline, and for a moment, I'm back 6 months back, when normal still wore our names. Back then, mornings were autopilot. 2 mugs, the same playlist, her perfume on the way out the door. Small talk about metrics and meetings. I told myself routine was comfort. Turns out it was camouflage. The jokes were lighter. Then the IT guy quips with a smile attached. I laughed along because marriage is compromise, and teasing is love until it isn't. 6 months ago, I would have wiped this stain immediately, eager to reset the set. Today, I leave it. Let it mark the scene. Every marriage has a moment where the set dressing peels and the stage lights burn hot. This is mine. I'm finally looking at what's been here all along. It didn't arrive as a speech. It arrived as seasoning. A backyard BBQ paper plates sagging with brisket neighbors comparing mortgages and mower brands. Madison laughed, light and effortless. "Ethan's great with routers," she said, tapping my shoulder like I was the family Wi-Fi. Chuckles. I smiled on cue. It felt harmless, like a rubber band snap. At Jenna's birthday downtown, she tried again. Candles, clinking glasses, a soft jazz cover of something from the 90s. "He keeps us online," she told her team, like our in-house IT hotline. I manage risk frameworks, incident response, compliance audits, but the room heard password reset. Weddings are worse because microphones make things honest. During a toast, she squeezed my hand and told the table he's the calm one. Doesn't push too hard, must be nice. Heads nodding, lucky, easy, safe. The word safe can mean dependable. It can also mean dull. None of it was cruel enough to confront. That's the trick. You can't call a paper cut an assault. You just tuck your hand away and pretend it isn't bleeding. I used to love explaining my work. Not the jargon anyone can hide behind acronyms, but the stakes. I'd say, picture a locked house with 10 doors you can't see. My job is to find the unlocked ones before someone worse does. People leaned in when I framed it like that. Breaches ransom notes, 3 a.m. War rooms where a single log line can save payroll. It made sense I keep small companies standing. Early on, Madison said it made her feel safe. She liked the way I diagrammed risk on napkins, how my hands moved when I talked through kill chains and lateral movement. "You make invisible things visible," she told me once, forehead against mine. Back then, pride wasn't loud. It was a steady pilot light. Certifications pinned in a drawer, not on a wall. Quiet raises. Clients who called me first when everything blinked red. I took comfort in being the person you want in the room when alarms scream. Somewhere along the way, the alarms became punchlines. And I kept telling myself she still heard them. It happened on a Thursday night at her company's mixer, one of those rooftop things with string lights and watered-down cocktails. I stood beside her holding a plate of sliders, half listening as she introduced me around. "This is my husband, Ethan. He's in IT support." IT support. 2 words harmless to most ears, but they flattened everything I'd built into something you call when your printer jams. The group smiled politely, nice, dependable, replaceable. I wanted to correct her. Cybersecurity analyst. The guy who stops breaches before the morning news finds them. The reason your data still exists. But the music was too loud and her hand was already on someone's arm, laughing. Later in the car, I tried to joke about it. She said, "Does it really matter what I call it? People don't get that tech stuff anyway." Maybe not, but I did. And for the first time, it felt like my own wife didn't. The distance didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly like static between radio stations. At first, it was small things. She stopped pausing mid-story to include me, stopped finishing my sentences. Our jokes, once private shorthand, started dying halfway out of her mouth. Nights got quieter. Madison scrolled through her phone beside me, thumb flicking faster than her breathing. I'd say something, anything, and she'd nod without looking up. It wasn't anger. Anger would have meant heat. This was colder. Even her touch changed. A shoulder pat instead of a hug. A quick brush when passing in the hallway. The kind of contact you give a colleague, not a partner. I told myself it was stress, long hours, corporate deadlines. That once the next campaign wrapped, she'd come back. But she didn't. When you live with someone long enough, you can tell when they stop seeing you. The body's still there, the laugh still familiar, but the eyes start looking past you like they've already moved on. It happened at a small dinner in South Austin. 4 couples chili bubbling on the stove, a long oak table scarred in the right places. We were trading stories about work, wins the harmless kind, a closed deal, a clean audit, a promotion rumor. When it came to me, I mentioned a client who'd passed a surprise compliance check after a rough month. Madison smiled, lifted her glass, and said, "See, he's great when it's not too technical." Laughter, light, automatic. My face warmed before my brain caught up. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the table, inviting them in. Jokes travel fast in a room that wants to be comfortable. "We should borrow him for our Wi-Fi," someone said. "My printer hates me," another added. I could have redirected, told the story about shutting down a lateral movement attempt at 2 a.m. Instead, I let the moment pass and studied my napkin like it had secrets. On the drive home, the car felt smaller. She hummed to the radio. I counted the streetlights and tried to decide whether humiliation always sounded this cheerful. Memorial Day weekend backyard. BBQ, the smell of smoke and sunscreen. I was flipping burgers when Madison called out from across the lawn. "Careful, babe. Those extra patties might end up right here." She patted her stomach and laughed. People chuckled, the polite, nervous kind that dies too quickly. I laughed too, the way you do when the alternative is silence. The spatula shook in my hand, a tremor. No one noticed. It wasn't the first jab, but it landed deeper. She told me weeks earlier she missed how fit I used to be. Fair. We're all fighting time, but doing it in front of friends. That wasn't honesty, it was performance. Later, when the smoke cleared and the lawn chairs emptied, I found the same spot where she'd been standing, the grass still pressed down from her heels. Funny thing about jokes, if you repeat them often enough, people start believing they're true. And sometimes so do you. It didn't feel like a fight. It felt like weather. Not a storm you can point to, just a steady salt wind that eats rock given enough days. One remark at a mixer, another at dinner, a shrug in the car, a sigh when I spoke. None of it brutal, all of it cumulative. I started hearing her voice in places it didn't belong over my shoulder while I weighed a mitigation plan in the back of my head when I drafted a report. Not too technical, safe. It support. The words sanded me down until even victories felt smaller in my hands. I caught myself editing my stories, trimming the parts I loved because they bored her. I dressed quieter, laughed softer, sat at the edges of rooms we once owned together. You can measure compromise in inches, the space between chairs, the pause before you answer, the way you flinch at your own name. If love is supposed to build, this felt like demolition, polite, efficient, and signed off by everyone present. The sentence arrived without sirens. Maybe she doesn't respect me anymore. It sat there on the passenger seat while I waited at a red light on South Lamar, staring at a billboard selling certainty in 3 words. I mouthed mine like a confession and felt something tilt inside. Respect was always our quiet contract. We didn't need speeches, just the small courtesies that make 2 people feel taller together. Lately, I felt shorter. I replayed her jokes, her edits to my introductions, the way she corrected my stories in front of friends, sanding off anything that made me look sharp. If respect is oxygen, we'd been living at altitude. Headaches I'd named stress were something else, thin air. I tried to bargain with the thought, maybe she's tired, maybe I'm sensitive, maybe the room heard it wrong, but the maybes felt like packing peanuts around a heavy box. You can't cushion the weight forever. At the next green, I didn't drive home. I parked by the river and let the thought expand until it filled the car. It happened over Sunday pot roast at Olivia and Daniel's place, linen napkins, a candle that smelled like cedar, and clean money. Daniel was gracious as always, telling a soft focus story about his promotion to regional manager, new territory, bigger team. Same humility. He's the kind of man who makes achievement look like good manners. Madison leaned in, eyes bright. "That's what I'm talking about, Drive," she said, tapping her fork against her glass like she was toasting ambition itself. Then she turned, not to me, but toward the table. "Daniel just keeps leveling up. It's inspiring." I smiled because that's the rule when you're cast as supporting actor. Olivia squeezed Daniel's arm. Someone said, "Well deserved." Then Madison added almost thoughtfully, "It's attractive when someone chases more." The word attractive hung over the centerpiece like steam. No one said my name, but I felt it leave the room. On the drive home, she replayed Daniel's milestones the way people rewatch a favorite scene. I counted the exits, nodding at the right beats, and wondered when I stopped being a benchmark and became a cautionary tale. Olivia refilled the wine and passed the gravy boat like a relay baton. Conversation drifted to Raise's relocations, next year plans, the family's favorite sport. Daniel, polite to a fault, downplayed his numbers. Madison didn't let the ball touch the floor. "Ambition is sexy," she said, smiling at the table, not at me. Forks paused mid-air. Someone laughed too loudly. The word sexy rang against the rim of my glass. I set my knife down and watched mashed potatoes collapse under their own steam. Sexy is a temperature, a current. I used to believe we shared one. Lately it felt like she was plugged into a different grid. She kept going quarterly goals, stretch roles, how hunger keeps people alive. I nodded on cue, the house-trained version of agreement. No one asked what I was chasing. No one needed to. Madison had already written the caption. On the drive home, the car smelled like cedar and approval. She said the night was energizing. I rolled the window down and let January air bite my face, wondering when desire got reassigned to a resume. I laughed when I was supposed to, just enough teeth, just enough sound. It's a skill you pick up in long relationships, the polite chuckle that keeps the evening moving. Plates cleared, compliments traded, Daniel's dog nosing my knee. For approval I could still give. From the outside, I was fine. Inside, something delicate gave way. It wasn't a shatter, more like the sound tempered glass makes when a stress line finally meets its match. A hairline crack ran through the picture I'd been carrying of us, the one where teasing meant intimacy, where sexy was a private language, where we were on the same team, even when the scoreboard was blurry. Driving back, Madison recapped goals like she was narrating a highlight reel. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and cataloged the fault line, the jokes, the comparisons, the way my name wasn't needed to make her point. Cracks don't announce themselves to guests. They wait for quiet houses and bathroom mirrors. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I knew this one had already reached the frame. I opened a note on my phone the next morning and gave it a plain name, Household. No one clicks a note called Household. First entry ambition is sexy dinner at Olivia's. Tone public. Then I added context, like a forensic tech dusting for prints. Who was there, what was poured, where the laugh landed. I wasn't building a case, I was checking my pulse. The file grew in inches. He's in IT support, rooftop mixer. Great when it's not too technical, South Austin dinner. Careful with those patties, backyard friends, visible discomfort. Time, place, audience. If she was writing a narrative for the room, I wanted a record for the quiet. I screen-capped texts when the phrasing felt practiced. I wrote down my own reactions too, heat in the ears, a pause before speaking, that hollow behind the ribs. Patterns don't reveal themselves in memories. They appear in lists. By week 3, the note stopped feeling like paranoia. It felt like weather data pressure, dropping wind, shifting a storm you can't name yet, but know is already here. Was I imagining this? I asked the ceiling at 2 a.m., the fan clicking like a metronome for bad thoughts. It's easier to believe in your own oversensitivity than to admit the ground is moving. I replayed each line from the ledger and tried to grade them on a curve. Maybe she was tired. Maybe I misheard. Maybe the room added salt. Doubt is patient. It outlasts anger. It offered compromises. Delete the note, stop tallying, be fun again. I almost took the deal. I even scrolled back through old photos, trips, touchdowns, the night she framed my first cert, and I let the warmth argue her case. But the timeline wouldn't cooperate. The entries had rhythm, and not the good kind. Public settings, escalating stakes, the way teasing traveled better in crowds. I tried on the word thin-skinned, like a jacket. It didn't fit. At 2:17, I typed one more line. If it's in my head, the evidence will stop. Then I put the phone face down and stared into the hum, waiting for morning to pick a side. It showed up first in Mike's eyes at the block party. The half-second softened before he spoke the kindness you reserve for sprained ankles and bad news. He used to rib me about the Longhorns. Now he asked how I was really doing, voice lowered like the question might break. I said I was fine. The words sounded like a chipped plate. At poker night, jokes detoured around me. When I won a hand, the table clapped too warmly like applause for a kid's recital. Someone said, "Good to see you getting some wins, man," and I couldn't tell if they meant the pot or my life. Pity has a smell, citrus cleaner, and careful silence. Friends who once asked for security advice now offered me advice I didn't request. Date nights, help therapy's great. Don't take the little comments personally. Their eyes did the rest, darting, confirming what Madison's stories had already planted. I smiled, shuffled dealt. Inside, I felt cataloged, not a man exactly an exhibit. A lesson in what happens when you stop keeping up. Madison learned to grab the first sentence and never let go. At happy hour in the Domain, she'd open with a headline, "Wild Week at the Office," then stack anecdotes like dominoes until every conversation leaned her way. If someone asked me a question, she'd clarify. Mid-answer, trim the edges, return the spotlight. People laughed, thanked her for context, and I watched my own life get paraphrased. At block parties, she curated the playlist and the narrative. Ethan's the calm one. She'd say a phrase that sounds like praise until you hear the subtext. Not hungry, not urgent. When I tried to add a detailed client breach, averted long night, good outcome, she translated it into something safer. He helped with a tech hiccup. The room nodded. The story had been simplified for public use. It wasn't domination. It was editing. She became the moderator, the caption, the comment section. Gradually, friends repeated her version back to me, like closed captions that couldn't keep up with the audio. I stopped correcting them. The transcript had already been approved. I wasn't supposed to hear it. Happy hour at her office bar, low light, the buzz of after-work laughter. I'd swung by to drop off her car keys, small errand, quick goodbye. She didn't see me walk in. Madison was leaning near the patio rail, drink in hand, talking to a small circle of coworkers. I caught my name first the way you do when it doesn't belong. Then the sentence, "I just feel like I deserve better." The words didn't explode, they just landed. A soft thud in the chest, no echo, no follow-up. One woman murmured something sympathetic. Madison smiled, half apologetic, like she knew she'd said too much and didn't care. I could have stepped forward, made a joke, saved face. Instead, I turned and walked out, the sound of her laughter chasing me to the parking lot. It's strange how quickly a marriage can become public property. One sentence, 4 words, and suddenly everyone in the room owns a piece of it, except you. I stood by the curb outside the bar, keys still in my hand, her laughter blending into the hum of tires and neon. I deserve better. The phrase looped once, twice, then settled like grit behind my ribs. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not ever. Not directly. Words like that don't need an audience. They already have one. Besides, she'd just call it venting. Everyone complains about their spouse sometimes. I could already hear the defense. So I stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but precision. Silence can be a scalpel when you hold it steady. I wanted to see how the story grew without my interference, who she'd tell it to next, what shape it would take. That night, I drove home alone, left the porch light off, and sat in the dark living room until the clock reset to midnight. The trick about saying nothing is this: eventually people mistake it for peace. Sometimes that's exactly what you need them to do. Austin went quiet in layers, traffic thinning on South Lamar, a siren fading, the AC kicking on like a tired promise. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling fan carve circles into the dark. Every few minutes, the fridge coughed as if the house was trying to clear its throat and say something for us. I replayed the patio moment, frame by frame, her tilt of the glass, the angle of her shoulders, the soft chorus of agreement. My chest felt busy like a room full of wires humming under drywall. Something broke tonight. I didn't know if it was trust or just the myth that things would drift back to normal if I kept my head down. I tried counting breaths. I tried scripting what I'd say if I ever said anything. Each draft collapsed at the same line excuses I'd write for her, for me, for the version of us I wanted to keep. At 3:11 a.m., I opened my phone and scrolled the ledger. The pattern looked back steady as a heartbeat I could finally hear. I drew a boundary around my motive, not revenge clarity. I needed to know if the drift was real or just the echo chamber in my head. So I started collecting what could be collected without crossing lines. Screenshots of texts where the jokes had an edge. Calendar notes tied to comments, who was there, what was said, how it landed. Voice memos to myself in the car, time-stamped the way incident responders log a breach as it unfolds. I saved her captions from social posts, little rewrites of our life that always seemed to leave my part in the margins. I archived email threads where she forwarded my wins as helpful IT stuff, stripped of context. I added witness names, not to weaponize them, but to triangulate memory. Every entry had 3 fields: event language impact, event rooftop mixer, language IT support, impact heat in ears, shallow breathing, laughter in room. Patterns don't argue, they accumulate. By the end of the week, the file wasn't angry, it was clinical. And finally, it felt honest. The evidence wasn't dramatic, it was domestic. Banner previews lighting up the kitchen island while her phone charged, a shared iPad pinging from the couch with the same Apple ID. Moments when she'd hand me her phone to show a meme and a message thread would still be open, the last few lines visible like a stage with the curtain half raised. With Jenna, the coworker from produce aisle run-ins, the tone was airy, practiced. He's comfortable, too comfortable. With her college best friend Tessa, the phrasing sharpened. I need a partner who pushes. I'm tired of being the only engine. Sometimes they workshopped my job title like it was branding, say it's support. People get that. Email carried a cooler temperature, forwarded invites to leadership seminars, then a reply to Tessa Fuel. Surround yourself with people climbing. I didn't screenshot everything, just what repeated, dates, phrases, audiences. Reading those fragments didn't feel like spying. It felt like overhearing a story told in rooms I was technically standing in, just not counted as present. The phrase showed up everywhere once I knew to hear it, reevaluating my life choices. At first, it was tossed off in group chats, the kind of line you pair with a winky emoji and a Pilates selfie. Then it graduated to conversations on patios and porches, a mantra with better lighting. At a neighbor's wine night, she swirled a glass and said it again, softer, like a vow she was trying on. I've been reevaluating my life choices. Heads nodded. No one asked which choices. They didn't need to. She let the plural do the work. In our kitchen, the phrase arrived in disguise. I'm reevaluating my priorities, she said, rinsing berries, not looking up. The water ran loud enough to cover specifics. I dried a bowl and pretended we were talking about time management, not marriage triage. Reevaluating is tidy. It doesn't accuse, it optimizes. It promises a spreadsheet where feelings should be. Standing there with a dish towel in my hands, I realized I wasn't part of the calculation anymore. I was a line item she'd already highlighted in yellow, the color you use right before you hit delete. It clicked one Saturday while I was skimming her captions and hearing them echo at dinner parties. She wasn't just telling stories, she was authoring a role. In her version, she was the patient protagonist with a heavy lift, the woman who tried everything while her husband coasted. The plot was clean. Her hunger, my comfort. Her growth, my gravity. I started hearing the beats everywhere. I keep encouraging him. I've been caring so much. It's exhausting doing it all. None of those lines were outright lies. That's what made them effective. They were selective truths, dressed for sympathy, sanding off the parts where I stayed up all night, containing an incident where I said no to weekends because boundaries aren't laziness, they're survival. Victim narratives have great PR. They're easy to share and even easier to agree with. People want a hero to root for and a problem to name. In her edit, I wasn't a person. I was a premise. And once a premise calcifies, every new scene gets forced to fit. Doubt kept its hand on my shoulder, even with the ledger growing. I told myself stories about stress cycles, about Q2 pressure, about how every couple has a stretch where love speaks in abbreviations. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted a mundane culprit, too much coffee, not enough sleep. That Tuesday, she left early for a department head meeting. The house held its breath after the door clicked. Sun pushed a pale stripe across the counter, catching dust like snow in a projector beam. I made coffee, reheated yesterday's calm, and tried to work. Lately, she'd gotten quick with Lid's laptop screens dropped when I walked in, phone face down, a smile that didn't invite follow-up. I filed it under privacy, not secrecy. Adults get to own their corners. I turned to grab my mug and saw that the iPad on the island case half open like a mouth mid-sentence. Same Apple ID, screen still awake. A preview banner slid down, just a subject line, nothing more, and my stomach went cold in that precise clinical way you recognize from fire drills. I didn't touch it. Not yet. It lay there like a found wallet, familiar, not mine. The blue case half folded a corner of the screen, awake our shared Apple ID, blinking the same small ecosystem we'd built out of convenience and trust. A calendar alert slid by, then a badge count ticked on mail. I felt the old rulebook tap my shoulder. Don't snoop, don't script, don't turn marriage into discovery. I stood with my palms on the cool quartz and listened to the house. AC hum. A mockingbird outside. The tiny click of the iPad as another notification nudged the glass. We'd both used it for recipes, flights, Netflix. No passcode. Her line was always, "I have nothing to hide." Mine had been, "I don't need to look." I told myself I was collecting weather, not ammunition. That clarity is different from curiosity. I didn't swipe. Not yet. I watched the lock screen cycle previews, like headlines in a waiting room, and realized something simple. If your story can't survive daylight, it isn't a story. It's a plan. When I finally opened the mail app, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because the subject line refused to fade. Consultation request. Divorce proceedings. The word sat there like a fire alarm, with no sound, waiting for someone brave or stupid enough to press it. The message was still in drafts, unsent, but ready. Dated 2 weeks earlier. Dear Attorney Johnson, I am seeking a confidential consultation regarding a potential divorce. She wrote with the tone of someone ordering new countertops, professional measured, already decided. No rage, no heartbreak, just logistics. She mentioned 6 to 8 months in financial matters to be resolved, a timeline clean and efficient. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting. Then a third time because disbelief has muscle memory. I didn't feel betrayed, exactly, more reclassified, like I'd been moved from husband to phase 1 variable. She hadn't sent the email yet. Maybe she was still editing. Or maybe she just wanted to make sure the next draft of her life looked perfect before she hit send. There it was, buried halfway down the draft. Estimated timeline 6 to 8 months following annual bonus in June. No metaphors, no hesitation, just calendar math. She wasn't leaving in anger. She was scheduling efficiency. 6 to 8 months. Long enough to secure the bonus claim, she tried, and walk out when summer felt forgiving. I scrolled past polite phrasing about asset division and amicable resolution, legal shorthand for premeditation. I leaned back against the counter, the iPad light painting my hands. My reflection stared back in the glass, half ghost, half exhibit. I'd been pacing around feelings. She'd been plotting logistics. It wasn't the divorce part that stunned me. It was the precision. Madison had turned detachment into project management deadlines, dependencies, deliverables. The line that haunted me most wasn't even in the body of the email. It was the timestamp saved as draft, 7:43 a.m. Same morning, she'd kissed my cheek, said, "Don't forget milk." Turns out she was already grocery shopping for a different life. Curiosity is a slippery thing. You start with one draft and end up in the architecture of someone's second life. In the Files app, 2 folders sat near the top: financial planning and living arrangements. No passwords, no disguises, just confidence. Inside, financial planning spreadsheets lined up like soldiers' budget projections, asset allocations, retirement accounts, renamed under solo ownership, tabs labeled pre-post separation scenarios. She'd color-coded stability. Living arrangements held apartment listings downtown, PDFs of lease terms, a note titled Commute Comparison. One screenshot showed a mid-rise near Lady Bird Lake. The caption read, "Sunlight, Space, Independence." She wasn't leaving me for anyone. She was leaving me for efficiency, for a version of herself that didn't need to explain why she was unhappy. I closed the iPad, the click louder than it should have been. The house felt staged like a set I'd been walking through, unaware the director had already wrapped. The story was still being told in my name, but I wasn't in the next scene. She wasn't just unhappy. She was preparing her exit, not with slammed doors or suitcases, but with spreadsheets and sunlight renderings of apartments I'd never see. The calm of it chilled me more than any shout could have. People think divorce is a hurricane. This was a controlled demolition with permits. I set the iPad down and pressed my palms to the counter until the quartz stopped feeling like ice. A strange relief threaded through the shock. At least the fog had a shape. My instincts weren't jealous. They were accurate. I walked the house like a responder after a breach, checking for lateral movement passwords, banks, beneficiaries. Not to sabotage, to understand the blast radius. What would crack? What would hold? In the sink, a coffee cup weighted hers. Lipstick ring fading at the rim. I stared until the ring became a clock. 6 to 8 months. Tick, tick. I didn't yell. I didn't wake her phone with questions. I opened my own calendar instead and gave the day a name. Incident opened. I sat at the kitchen table, the iPad between my elbows, like a confession too polite to say out loud. The cursor blinked at the bottom of her draft, steady patient, as if waiting for her to return and finish the job. I read it once for the language, again for the intent, and a third time to convince myself this was still my life. The phrasing was surgical, amicable separation, financial independence, long-term clarity, no heat, no fingerprints. She'd written the emotional equivalent of a weather report, dry, partly detached, with a chance of new beginnings. I noticed how she referred to me, my spouse, not Ethan. Even in hypothetical form, she'd already reduced me to a category. The fourth time through, I stopped reading the words and watched the spaces between them. That's where the truth lived in everything she didn't have to explain. The cursor kept blinking. I matched my breathing to it until I realized it wasn't counting her sentences anymore. It was counting down. Everyone vents, she'd said on a different Tuesday, rinsing a wine glass, like it was proof. The phrase came back now, echoing off the draft on the screen. Venting is steam loud, brief gone. This was engineering. Timelines don't belong to venting. Folders don't. Bonus schedules definitely don't. I tried to wear her defense one more time to see if it fit better under fluorescent kitchen light. Maybe she needed a release valve. Maybe I'd been distant. Maybe the room heard her with more generosity than I did. But generosity can't explain a spreadsheet titled Pre-Post Separation Scenarios. In incident response, we separate noise from signal. Angry emails are noise. A dated draft to an attorney is signal. Repetition is signal. Silence calculated is the loudest signal of all. I closed my eyes and pictured her shoulders at that happy hour, relaxed, practiced already, living half a step ahead. Everyone vents works until you diagram the packet flow. Then you see it, not a flare-up, a route, not a mistake, a map. I stopped arguing with the evidence. The evidence didn't need my permission, but this wasn't venting. This was strategy. Venting spills, strategy sorts. It labels files, sets reminders, books, consultations in the soft hours before coffee cools. I could see the scaffold language tuned for sympathy, a timeline nested inside fiscal quarters, an exit framed as health. When you've worked enough incidents, you recognize intent by the footprint it leaves. This wasn't a surge. It was a planned cutover. I pictured her practicing lines in safer rooms. We grew apart. I tried. He's comfortable. The kind of script that earns nods without debate. Strategy doesn't argue. It preps the jury. So I made a decision without ceremony. No confrontation, no midnight tribunal. If she was going to manage her freedom, I would manage mine. I opened a blank note and wrote 3 words I could execute: attorney, assets, timeline. Not to mirror her move out of spite, but to step out of a story I didn't write. Clarity isn't warm. It is, however, perfectly lit. I could finally see the exits and the cost. I found Karen Thompson the way I'd triage a breach quietly through vetted referrals. 2 calls, 1 email, no drama. Her office sat in a low brick building off South Congress, the kind of place where fluorescent light makes everyone tell the truth. I booked the earliest slot. Karen was mid-50s, calm in the way you trust bridges. She didn't small talk. "Tell me what you know," she said, pen poised. I laid out the draft email, the 6 to 8 month window, the folders, the public narrative. I didn't editorialize. Facts only. Evidence first. She nodded at the right places, then asked sharper questions: mortgage name accounts, retirement beneficiaries, separate property, documentation of my consulting work. She wasn't interested in how much it hurt. She wanted the architecture. When I finished, she closed her notebook like a verdict. "Your wife has a plan," she said. "Good. Plans are predictable. We'll build our own." She mapped steps, disclosures, appraisals, a filing timeline that broke her element of surprise. No promises, just procedure. I walked out lighter, not happier. Relief isn't joy. It's airflow after smoke. Walking to the car with Karen's checklist in my pocket felt like sitting back at the console after an outage, screens lighting in a language I understood. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to Madison's edits. I was running my own playbook. Tasks replaced theories, pull statements, snapshot accounts, lockdown 2FA, document consulting income, schedule appraisal, quiet methodical verbs. Control didn't feel triumphant. It felt level. My breathing matched the turn signal's click as I merged onto South Congress. Each green light, another small confirmation that cause and effect still worked. I wasn't hoping she'd change or begging the room to hear me right. I was executing. At home, I opened a fresh folder response plan and moved my ledger inside. I added a calendar block named Filing Window and another called Conversations to Decline. Boundaries in black and white. The house sounded different that afternoon. Same AC, same fridge, same creak in the stair, but the frequency had shifted. I wasn't the subject of someone else's narrative anymore. I was the author of my next sentence. I didn't slam doors or rewrite history. I adjusted temperature. Cold but calm. It started with micro decisions, fewer explanations, shorter replies, no rescue jokes to smooth her punchlines. When she floated a complaint into the room, I let it land without building her a softer place for it to fall. Silence did the heavy lifting. Mornings, I brewed coffee, handed her a mug, and kept my voice even. If she asked about my day, I answered in headlines, no behind the scenes, no invitations to edit. At dinner, I let pauses earn their keep. You'd be surprised how much space appears when you stop filling it for other people. She noticed. You're distant, she said, testing the word like a thermometer. I'm here, I answered, which was true geographically and deliberately incomplete, emotionally. Cold isn't anger, it's clarity without padding. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting the parts of me that had been sanded down for applause I never asked for. Boundaries don't need volume. They just need to hold. Madison clocked the shift before she could name it. She watched me the way you study a thermostat you swear you didn't touch. You okay became her new small talk casual, as weather frequent as alerts. I said yes and let the words sit there unadorned the way facts prefer to live. She tried old keys and new locks. A tease about my hoodie, no smile returned. A clarification mid-story, I let the silence correct her. At dinner, she floated bait, rough day. I offered the headline, not the documentary. She tilted her head, waiting for the director's cut that never arrived. Confusion looks a lot like concern when you squint. She reached for my arm or asked follow-ups too late. Complimented the same shirt she'd once downgraded. None of it landed because none of it asked what changed. It only asked me to change back. What she felt was distance. What she missed was access. There's a difference. Access is a privilege disguised as intimacy. When you revoke it, people think you've disappeared. You haven't. You've simply stopped leaving the door open behind you. At home, I learned how silence sounds when it belongs to me. The house had its usual soundtrack dishwasher, hum muted news, Madison's heels marking tempo across the hardwood, but I stopped filling the gaps with explanation. When she sighed at the mail pile, I didn't rush to apologize. When she said, we really should organize this place, I nodded once neutral as a system log. She tested for life in the usual ways. You never listen. I looked up, made eye contact, and said nothing. Are you mad? She asked. No, I answered, honest but unhelpful. The trick isn't to freeze, it's to remove the temperature entirely. In the evenings, she'd narrate her day from the kitchen while I read. My book became a firewall. She threw words like pings, waiting for a response packet. None returned. It wasn't cruelty, it was containment. You don't patch a breach by shouting at it. You isolate the affected system and let it cool. Silence became my incident response. It was a neighborhood barbecue, paper plates, smoke in the air, and the low-grade competition of polite suburbia. Madison held court as usual, her laughter a little too bright. When someone asked about promotions, she leaned in, eyes glinting. Ethan's the calm one, she said. Some people just like to stay comfortable. The group chuckled the way people do when they smell blood but don't want to admit it. I felt the old instinct rise, the need to justify, to correct the record, but this time I let it pass. I took a sip of my beer, caught her gaze, and said evenly, contentment is underrated. The laughter stuttered, unsure where to land. A few heads nodded, a few looked away. Madison blinked, thrown off script. For once, her smile didn't find its mark. I didn't gloat. I just let the air reset around us. Sometimes the cleanest defense is agreeing so completely that the insult collapses under its own weight. You can feel a room change temperature without anyone touching the dial. After my contentment is underrated, the smiles around the patio reset smaller, more thoughtful, less sure of their cue. Mike asked what I'd been working on, and I gave him the real version incident response, a gnarly compliance rescue, a weekend cutover that kept a payroll from missing Tuesday. He whistled. That's not exactly coasting. Madison tried to steer it back. He's downplaying it, she said, reaching for that old narrator's voice. But the line didn't travel. Jenna's eyes flicked between us like she'd finally noticed the captions hadn't matched the audio for a while. People began telling their own comfortable stories, the kind where steady saved the day. The laughter turned kinder, directed toward me instead of at me. Madison went quiet in that specific way, lips smiling, eyes busy doing math. No one called her out. They didn't need to. Social gravity had shifted a few degrees enough for an understanding to settle. The bruise wasn't where she'd been pointing. It was on the hand doing the prodding. Memorial Day, flags on porches, smoke drifting low. Mike drifted over with a fresh beer, and that look people get when they realize the story might be different than they were told. So, what do you really do, man? He asked, not unkind. I gave him the plain English version. Mid-market cybersecurity. Think small hospitals, manufacturers, city utilities, places that can't afford to go dark. I look for unlocked doors before criminals do. When they're already inside, I kick them out without shutting the building. He leaned in. Ransomware stuff. Yeah. Also compliance boring until it saves payroll. Last month, we stopped lateral movement at 2 a.m. and kept an HR database from becoming tomorrow's headline. A couple neighbors joined questions tumbling. I told them about tabletop exercises, fishing drills, the way one careless click can cost a quarter's profit. No heroics, just mechanics. Sounds intense, Mike said. It's steady, I answered. Steady is how you win. Across the lawn, Madison smiled too tightly and adjusted a plate that didn't need adjusting. The room, such as it was, had its answer. I stopped trimming the edges. When someone new wandered over and asked what I did, I didn't hand them the safe shrink-wrapped version. Cybersecurity consulting, I said. No apology in it, no wink. I help companies keep bad actors out and keep the lights on when something slips through. What does that look like day to day? A neighbor asked. Threat hunting incident response compliance hardening. Translating nerd into business so the CFO actually funds the fix. On good weeks, I'm boring. On bad weeks, I'm awake at 3 babysitting logs until the attack gives up. The words felt clean leaving my mouth, like I'd finally stopped whispering in my own house. People nodded. Someone said their brother's plant got hit last year and paid. Another asked about home network tips. I gave them 3 simple ones and watched their faces change from entertained to engaged. Madison hovered at the fringe smile pinned on calculating. For once, I didn't edit my life to make hers land softer. I just told the truth and let the room do its own math. You could watch the recalculation happen in real time. Brows lifting shoulders, angling toward me, questions replacing punchlines. Mike's wife blinked like she'd just switched lenses. Wait, so that plant didn't have backups. Another neighbor whistled a soft damn when I explained how a single endpoint can open the whole floor. Madison's smile stalled mid-face, the kind you get when the teleprompter freezes. She didn't frown. She buffered. Eyes a fraction too wide, chin lifted like posture alone could keep the narrative upright. She tried a small laugh, ambient non-committal, and it evaporated before it reached the group. Ethan's. Modest. She offered a placeholder where control used to be. Doesn't sound modest, Mike said. Sounds necessary. I wasn't grandstanding. I just kept answering the questions people actually asked. The more I spoke plainly, the quieter Madison's captions became. That's the thing about truth in a room, it doesn't compete. It accumulates. Someone handed me a fresh plate. Madison adjusted a centerpiece that didn't need adjusting. And in that tiny pause between her smile and her next sentence, I heard the click of a story losing its footing. Madison pivoted like a pro new angle, same urgency. He's downplaying it, she said, laugh, turned soft focus. I'm always telling him to brag more. He hates attention. On paper, it was supportive. In air, it sounded like spin. She started layering compliments that didn't match the seams. He's basically a genius, she told Jenna, then misnamed the cert I earned last quarter. CIS. Something. She quoted a salary band no one in my lane uses. She called ransomware malware bugs, then looked to me for a save I didn't provide. People nodded, but their eyes were 10 seconds behind tracking the mismatch. The more she patched, the more thread showed. We just keep each other balanced, she added, slipping her hand through my elbow like a prop. It felt like being presented, not held. I didn't correct her. I let the sentences sit under their own lights. Authenticity has a frequency you can't fake. The playlist stuttered, the conversation drifted, and in the space where her version used to take root, silence did something simple and final. It told the truth. For the first time, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth did it for me. It moved through the patio like a quiet tide, no speeches, no victory laps, just a recalibration you could feel in people's posture. Questions found me instead of her captions. I answered simply and then stopped resisting the old reflex to add footnotes so no one felt awkward. Madison hovered at the edge of the circle, editing aloud with a smile that didn't quite make it to her eyes. I didn't swat at it. You don't argue with smoke. You open a window. The night did the rest. Mike changed the subject to grills. Jenna asked for a password manager recommendation. Someone handed me a beer and said, "Glad you're around, man, not around Madison." Around. On the walk home, crickets louder than our conversation, I realized how heavy the armor had been. The explanations, the self-deprecation, the strategic humility. I set it down without ceremony. Truth doesn't shout. It just keeps standing after the noise gets tired. 2 weeks after the barbecue kindness arrived like a gift with no card. I came downstairs to the smell of pancakes and butter warming the air. Madison stood at the stove in one of my old college shirts, hair up, voice soft. "Thought we could sit down before work," she said, sliding a plate toward me like a peace offering. She asked about my clients, their names, not just your tech stuff. She laughed at the right places, touched my wrist when I answered, refilled my coffee before I asked. It wasn't unfamiliar. It was out of season like Christmas lights in March. I matched her tone but kept my edges. "Thanks," I said, meaning the plate, not the rewrite. When she floated a weekend idea, hill country, a cabin, no phones, I nodded without committing. She smiled a fraction too quickly as if she'd hit a rehearsed beat. Affection isn't suspicious by itself. Timing is. You don't reverse a narrative overnight without a deadline somewhere on a calendar. The pancakes were good. The performance was better. I ate, listened, and let the room keep its secrets. I've run enough post-incident reviews to recognize damage control. The tells are consistent, sudden transparency, overcorrection, and a surge of reassuring language that arrives before the facts change. Madison flipped switches all week. Compliments where there used to be critiques. Public reframes. He's brilliant at what he does, delivered to the same audience that once heard IT support. Hand on my arm in rooms where I'd learned to fold mine. She asked about my projects with a curiosity that skimmed the surface and moved on before depth could make us both honest. She laughed, softer, touched, longer, floated coupley plans like buoys in choppy water. What if we just reset? It sounded less like romance and more like PR. Get ahead of the story before it publishes. I didn't punish the effort. I also didn't mistake it for repentance. Timing tells its own truth, and the calendar still said June was coming. When people scramble to rewrite a narrative, they don't change the plot. They tweak the captions and hope the audience blinks. I kept my eyes open. By Thursday, she'd upgraded to tenderness with a schedule. "What if we sneak away this weekend?" she asked, sliding a brochure across the counter. Hill country cabin string lights over cedar decks. Couples smiling like they'd never learned spreadsheets. No phones, just us. Reset. The word reset did a lot of lifting. She threaded her arm through mine and stayed there a beat too long, eyes soft with the same warmth that used to be unscripted. She named wineries, hiking trails, a breakfast place with a line worth standing in. I could almost hear the subtext, change the scene, change the story. "Sounds nice," I said, and meant it in the narrowest possible way. The idea of trees appealed. The idea of amnesia did not. She studied my face for a yes she could mark it later. I gave her a maybe that didn't bend. Affection is easy to counterfeit. It's the provenance that's hard. When love shows up with itinerary bullets, you have to ask who booked the trip and what they're hoping to outrun. I treated the week like monitoring, not mending. Observe, don't absorb. When she reached for my hand, I noted duration, context, audience. When she complimented my shirt, the same one she once downgraded, I logged the pivot without rewarding it. Boundaries aren't a mood. They're maintenance. At dinner, she floated a memory, our first road trip, bad coffee, better music, and waited for me to glow on cue. I smiled small and true, then let the silence keep its shape. Old me would have filled it, turned nostalgia into proof we were fine. New me measured consistency over charisma. One warm night doesn't cancel a cold season. I watched for pattern change, less public editing, fewer digs, curiosity that survived my short answers. Some boxes ticked, most didn't. Timing still orbited June. In incident response, you don't celebrate when the alarm's quiet for an hour. You watch the logs. That's what I did. Eyes open, heart steady, no declarations. If love was coming back, it would show up without stage lights. If it wasn't, I already had a plan. It was almost fascinating, watching her rewrite history. Scenes we both lived got color corrected on the fly. The rooftop mixer where I fixed printers became the night she bragged about my cybersecurity work. The barbecue dig about my stomach was recast as playful encouragement. She swapped captions like it was as simple as changing filters, same photo, gentler hue. She started telling friends, "We've been in a great place lately," as if lately stretched backward far enough to cover the dents. When Jenna mentioned the happy hour where Madison said she deserved better, Madison blinked and said, "We were joking." Context. Context is the word people use when the footage doesn't match the script. I didn't argue. I let her new narrative walk around and try on our furniture. It never fit. Memory is stubborn. It keeps the original audio. In quiet rooms, the earlier lines still played, the jabs, the edits, the draft. Revisions can soften the edges, but they don't change the timestamp. You can repaint a wall. You can't uncrack the plaster. First week of June, sunlight already mean by 8 a.m. Madison set a mug in front of me, like a treaty, and said, "We should see Dr. Williams." She kept her eyes on the steam, not on me. Couples therapy, she added in case I missed the headline. I found an opening next week. The timing clicked like a combination lock. Bonus season, draft timelines, damage control with credentials. "I'm open to therapy," I said, and let the sentence stop there. The old me would have rushed to prove goodwill, to book the slot, to signal hope. The current me watched her face parse my neutrality and search for purchase. "She's highly recommended," Madison said, sliding her phone across the table. Website testimonials, a smiling headshot with soft lighting and safe words. I want us to work. Want is a verb that asks for receipts. I took a sip, tasted butter from yesterday's pancakes, and nodded once. Why now? She flinched at the simplicity of it. Calendars don't blush. People do. Why now, I asked, and let the words sit between us like a glass we both refused to touch. Madison blinked, then picked a safer shelf. Because we've been off. I miss us. She folded her hands, counselor ready. Therapy could help reset patterns. Patterns. The word did a lot of work for her. I watched her assemble sentences that sounded right and landed wrong. Soft concern, practiced empathy, a scaffolding built for an audience that wasn't here. What changed this week? I said, keeping my voice level. What made next week the week? She exhaled through her nose, a controlled release. I've been thinking about priorities. I want to fight for us. I nodded slowly as if tasting a spice I couldn't place. Priorities? I repeated like a stenographer. Silence stretched. The fridge kicked on. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck downshifted. If a question has an honest answer, it shows up quickly. When it doesn't, you learn more from the delay than the reply. I let the pause keep time and felt the calendar she was hiding press its weight against the room. "Because our marriage is worth fighting for," she said, and placed the sentence carefully between us like a centerpiece meant to be admired, not touched. It was a good line. Polished. Portable. I could hear it traveling well in group chats and offices with glass walls. Worth fighting for, I repeated, tasting each word. In incident reports, value statements come after evidence. In PR, they come first. Her eyes held mine, steady, rehearsed. I don't want to lose what we have, what we had. I considered the ledger, the draft, the timeline braided around June, the sudden breakfast, the weekend brochure, the curated tenderness. Fights in my experience involved declaring the threat and naming the plan to counter it. She was offering neither just a slogan. "What does fighting look like to you?" I asked. Specifically. She glanced at her phone, then back at me. Therapy, quality time, better communication, all good nouns, none of them verbs. "Okay," I said, and watched the relief bloom too fast. Worth is proved in actions, not announcements. The proof would arrive or it wouldn't. Either way, I had my own plan. I set my coffee down, unlocked my phone, and turned the screen so the morning could see it too. Email to Laura Johnson. I said voice even. March 12th, consultation for divorce. The subject line sat there like a label on a specimen jar. No theatrics, just metadata. Madison's breath caught a small misfire. You left the iPad on the island, I said. No passcode. I didn't go looking for a story. I found the one already written. I kept my finger still so the screen wouldn't dim. Draft status, 6 to 8 month window, after bonus in June. The bullet points of an exit plan dressed as prudence. She reached for explanation like a towel for a spill. It was a draft. I was exploring options. Options come after conversations, I said. This was a timeline. The kitchen made its familiar noises, the AC, the fridge, a neighbor's truck, while our version of worth fighting for stood next to a consultation request with a date stamp. I let the silence do inventory. Some truths don't need witnesses. They just need daylight. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then tried a softer lane. We can fix this, she said, palms up like terms. Dr. Williams, weekends away, a reset. I shook my head once, not unkind. You planned your exit. I planned mine. The sentence surprised even me with how quietly it landed. No echo, just placement. I slid a folder from the counter. Copies, not threats. Appraisal request. Account snapshots. A retainer agreement with Karen Thompson's letterhead. Dates, signatures, the boring grammar of decisions. Her eyes moved the way you track a breach across a map, left, right, back again, looking for an open door that wasn't there. You already talked to someone. 3 someones. Counsel, advisor, agent. I kept my voice level. I'm not here to ambush you. I'm here to end the part where we pretend. She reached for the old script, tears, history, the good years words that used to work on me. They still meant something. They just didn't change the math. I won't drag you, I said. I also won't stay staged for your timeline. The divorce papers are filed, I said. You'll be served Wednesday. The sentence didn't need italics. It arranged the room by itself. Madison blinked like the light had changed without warning. That's fast, she said, as if speed were the injury. It's on a timeline, you understand, I answered. Not cruel, precise. Her jaw worked through counteroffers therapy. First, a 30-day pause, a promise to try. We can still be civil, I said. We can still be fair, but we can't keep pretending this is undecided. Outside, a delivery truck downshifted. Inside, the AC kicked on hard, a gust that made the draft on her iPad feel colder in retrospect. She stared at the folder I'd set between us. The way you stare at a locked door you thought was a window. I didn't think I know. I wasn't triumphant. I was finished. Wednesday wasn't a threat. It was logistics. A knock on a door. A signature on a line. The moment the narrative stops arguing and starts printing in black and white. Madison's voice snapped from polished to raw in a breath. We can fix this, she said, stepping toward me like distance was the problem. Her hands hovered, palms open, bargaining with air. We'll do therapy. I'll stop with the jokes. She ran out of verbs before she ran out of fear. Panic turns people into quick editors. She started cutting scenes, pasting better ones on top. The early years road trips that weekend, we painted the spare room the wrong color and laughed anyway. That was us, she said, as if nostalgia were a notarized document. It mattered. It just didn't undo the timeline. I don't hate you, I said. The truth of it surprised us both. I'm done living in a story where I disappear. She grabbed at new angles, money the house, what people would think. We can control the narrative. That's the problem, I said softly. You already did. For a second, everything stopped, the AC, the traffic, even her hands. In the quiet, I felt something settle. Not revenge. Closure finding its chair and sitting down. You convinced everyone you deserve better. Congratulations. I finally agree. The line left my mouth without heat like a verdict read by a clerk. Madison recoiled as if neutrality stung more than anger. She searched my face for the old cues, softening a joke to walk it back, the reflex to comfort the person hurting me. Nothing moved. I didn't mean she started. You meant it enough times to make it true, I said. Not because I became smaller, but because I stopped proving I'm not. Her eyes filled, then cleared, crisis management rebooting. What am I supposed to tell people? The truth, I said. Tell them you got what you wanted. She laughed once brittle. "This isn't what I wanted, it's what you rehearsed," I answered. I picked up the folder. The papers sounded heavier than they were. On the counter, the coffee stain from that first morning had darkened into a permanent ring. She followed my eyes to it and flinched. "That doesn't come out," I said. "You replace the tile. Some things you clean, some things you change. News travels faster than apologies." Olivia stopped texting exclamation points and started asking logistical questions. Daniel stayed polite but distant the way you do when collateral spills onto the carpet. At a family dinner I didn't attend, Madison tried to skip to the lesson. The room, I'm told, preferred the facts. Friends who once echoed her captions went quiet, then careful. Reputation is a boomerang. If you throw it hard enough, it comes back with your fingerprints on it. I signed a short lease downtown and moved into a condo with a clean horizon glass concrete. The river, a long, steady sentence. Work expanded to fill the space I'd reclaimed. Clients called late and paid on time. I onboarded 2 new retainers, rebuilt my sleep, and remembered what focus feels like when it isn't performing for a jury. Nights were loud in the right ways. Keyboard's fan hummed my own breathing, finally uncoached. I didn't post a highlight reel. I didn't correct her version. Silence became my freedom, not the absence of sound, the recovery of voice. Evening folds over downtown, and Lady Bird Lake takes the color of old steel. Paddleboards drift like slow thoughts. From my balcony, the city hums, air handlers' sirens far off a train, reminding everything to keep moving. I rest my hands on cool rail and run the last audit in my head. Alarms acknowledged. Breaches contain system stable. I don't rehearse speeches anymore. I don't edit myself for rooms I don't owe. The only ledger I keep now is quiet sleep hours, miles walked, clients saved from headlines. In the kitchen behind me, a single mug cools. No second place setting. No captions. I don't miss the marriage. I miss who I thought she was. She was right. She deserved better. So did I. The wind lifts clean and ordinary. Somewhere a knock is landing on a different door. Here none will. If you made it this far, subscribe. Stories like this, they're not about revenge. They're about clarity. Come back for the next one. I'll be here steady as the water, ready when you are.